It's been a topsy-turvy year for specialty crop growers here in Michigan. In the spring, growers facing an uncertain market had to decide if they should bother planting. And if they do, can they get adequate labor to harvest the crop? It's a make-or-break question for an industry that relies heavily on seasonal, migrant, and H-2A laborers to help harvest throughout the summer and fall.
As far as our labor supply right now, we have domestics that came in. We also have H-2A workers. The first batch of them came in April, middle of April. We had 60 more arrive this past weekend, and we'll have 60 more arrive, 56 or something like that, arrive next weekend. And those are all H-2A workers. And the last of them will arrive about the 20th of July. And that's when things are really rocking and rolling as far as harvesting and packing and stuff. So we need our full labor force about that time. But when we get all done, we'll have about 220 to 225 people on staff. 160 or 70 of those will be H-2A workers. The rest will be domestic. Some of our local seasonal workers and then some of our full-time people will make up that number.
And then there's the COVID-19 pandemic, which has impacted farms and packaging facilities across the state.
We're lucky enough to have a large enough labor camp where we have a couple of the housing units set aside for anybody who comes up sick, where we can quarantine them there. We've already had some of the COVID-19 here. Some people test positive and we've quarantined them. They were all asymptomatic but one.
The latest wrinkle for growers comes in the form of an executive order that required them to modify on-farm housing to encourage social distancing and further prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
It's very hard for growers to keep up with all the COVID stuff, and especially you have smaller growers that are trying to keep up with all this. You've got to have a COVID plan, a preparedness plan for how you're going to deal with people when they get sick and stuff. MDARD came out with some rules a week and a half ago on a Thursday, and on Tuesday our camp inspection and they came out to check our COVID preparedness plan. We had 4 or 5 days to get it ready. And some of that kind of stuff, it's a little hard to take as a grower. And you know, we want to keep our people safe because we want to be able to stay in production. I want to keep myself safe and my family safe too.
The Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development will begin inspections on produce farms grossing over $250,000 in annual food sales. These inspections are different from voluntary third-party audits and are mandatory. The inspection process begins with a phone call from MDARD, and this gives operators time to discuss their operation with the department and determine whether or not they are exempt from the Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule.
There's a lot of little nuances about whether or not someone's in or someone's out in terms of inspections. So some of the calls that have been made up to now have been to try and figure out who's in and who's out. I know growers are concerned when MDARD calls, and I get that. If the government were calling me, I'd be a little bit skeptical and concerned. If you are a grower who isn't needing to be inspected, the more information you give around that, the better it is for you in the sense that they'll leave you alone. MDARD estimates that only about 1,300 farms in Michigan qualify or are what they call covered under the rule, which basically means those are folks that will either need an inspection or need to supply some data or some records showing that they don't need an inspection. Really to let folks sort of have the inspector introduce themselves to the grower and start to build sort of a relationship, ongoing relationship. The initial findings, probably the grower will have a year or so to put them in place. There may be situations where a problem might be a little bit more serious from a food safety perspective. In those cases, there may be some talk about how to fix it and some requirement for that grower to fix it a little more quickly.
There are a number of ways to prepare for an on-farm inspection. One way is to complete an on-farm readiness review through Michigan State University Extension.
The OFRRs are scheduled through MSU, but we're working with a broad swath of individuals to carry them out. So yes, I would recommend you do it before. If you cannot do it before, I would do it after. That will link you into a set of resources. The produce safety technicians are scattered throughout the state. These are specially trained individuals specific to produce safety that can come out on a regular basis and work with you. I realize harvest is the worst time in the world to come visit a farmer, and I get that time is particularly important. We also know that when we do the on-farm readiness reviews in the heat of harvest, that's when we start to see when things happen. I've been through pack houses before harvest, and you look at it, it looks great. In the middle of harvest, when there's humidity, you get to see where condensation's happening. You get to see all where the farm workers maybe aren't doing where the pinch points are, and those are really where we find the problems. Is when we see folks during harvest. We promise to make that time as valuable to you as is humanly possible through an on-farm readiness review.
Findings of on-farm readiness reviews are kept confidential, and all information and notes collected are given to the participating growers. Reviews can be scheduled by emailing ofrr@msu.edu.